For this video, I wanted to do a quick book review. I read this book a few days ago. It's called Reflections of a Christian Kung Fu Master, and it's by a man named Rick Wilcox. And if you're interested in taking an Eastern martial art, but you have reservations because it may conflict with your Christian faith, and you'll get condemnations from others saying you shouldn't do it, I would definitely check this book out. It's very concise, and the author does a good job dispelling the condemnations that you will often hear regarding your participation in a martial arts style like Kung Fu. And you can buy the online version of this book and read it on your computer or your phone. It's only about $3. And I read this in probably about half an hour. And Rick Wilcox, he talks about how martial arts were actually practiced in China before the Buddhist, the Taoist, or the Confucianist religious and philosophical influences really were even around. And prior to being practiced in Shaolin temples, families had their own martial arts style that they practiced, and then they would pass on down to the family. And the author even brings up how the daughters, they would not be taught the fighting style, the family fighting style, for fear that they would take these secrets to another family once they got married. And the exception being that they may teach the daughters after they had become an old maid. And back in China, in ancient times, if a woman wasn't married by around 15, she was considered to be past her prime, which I kind of found interesting considering how things are so different today. Now women aren't settling down and marrying until their 30s. But another interesting point he brought up is the fact that prior to Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism, the ancient Chinese were monotheistic. And the theory that he put forward in this book was that the ancient Chinese actually worshiped the God of the Old Testament, God the Father, because he brings up that in the ancient Chinese records, they include the story of, the biblical stories of the Great Flood and the Tower of Babel. And I admit that I may have read this before in another book, but I'd kind of forgotten about it, and I really haven't investigated this myself. But it was kind of interesting, if it is true, that the ancient Chinese would have the accounts of these biblical stories in their records. The author is also clear in the book. He does a good job because he does mention and makes it clear that if you follow Christ, you cannot participate in the worship of Buddha or false gods, or participate in non-Christian rituals. And many of the things people fear about Eastern martial arts are simply Eastern cultural differences that don't necessarily have religious connotations. Like he touches on the yin-yang symbol, which you see a lot of martial arts styles use that symbol. And, if you go into a dojo, you'll often see that symbol on the wall or something. And that symbol simply represents dualities that exist in nature, and many of those themes are also found in the Bible. And he also points out some differences between the dragon of the Bible and the dragon of Chinese culture, and how, in his view, that they are two different things. And the Chinese dragon, he says, isn't linked to the biblical one being Satan. And really, I think any martial arts style you participate in, you can take away from it the actual physical fighting style, to protect yourself and your family. And you could disregard anything that may be in conflict with your faith, which may be Buddhist theology or philosophy. And for example, wrestling and boxing, two Western styles that are popular in the West, they were once practiced by the ancient Greeks and Romans who were pagans. But I don't really see any danger of someone who participates in wrestling and boxing worshiping Zeus unless they voluntarily seek to do so. And I think the same thing could be said with Kung Fu. Just because you practice the fighting style of Kung Fu doesn't mean that you're going to automatically become a Buddhist or Confucianist. So I think with that being said, that it is perfectly fine to practice martial arts without taking away any kind of Eastern religious influences. And one example I kind of often use is how Diamond Dallas Page, he created DDP yoga to help people get into shape and improve their lives. And yoga is often problematic because of the Hinduism aspect, the meditation and the chanting and stuff like that. Well, Diamond Dallas Page stripped all that stuff out, and he kept the movements but ramped up the intensity of the workout. And much of the things people worry about are not much of an issue anyway, unless you're going to China to actually train at a Buddhist Shaolin temple. The fact is, most instructors in America and other Western countries, they've already secularized the martial arts, and there's no religious ritual aspect involved with the training whatsoever. And the whole idea really behind the muscular Catholic discipline is practicing a form of physical culture to strengthen your body, and also practicing the spiritual discipline, which would be the traditional Catholic faith, to take care of your soul. So the goal is to strengthen your body and your soul together. And when you combine the two disciplines, it can only make you, overall stronger, because both disciplines feed off each other. And the one disagreement I had with the book came in at the end when he was speaking to the readers, and it was a theological disagreement on the conversion process. And since Wilcox takes a more modern Protestant view, it differs from the traditional view of how to come to the faith, which if you're interested in following the muscular Catholic discipline and coming to the true faith and converting, it's much better to read and study the church fathers rather than preachers or pastors from many of these modernist sects that have came up along in the last few hundred years. And that's pretty much it. Like I said, it was a quick read. Really, there's no danger in taking martial arts. If you do find an instructor that kind of pushes that stuff, which I would say would have to be pretty rare, I would look elsewhere. But other than that, I think you're good. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more. Thank you.